There's a sound a grown man makes when the ground goes out from under him, and it isn't a shout. It's smaller than that. It's the sound of a breath he forgot he was holding for 3 years. I've worked cattle most of my life. I've seen men gored, men frozen blue, men wrecked by drink and by money and by women. I thought I'd seen the whole catalog of ways a person can break. I hadn't. Because nothing, prepared me for the afternoon Eli Brand stood at the edge of another man's wedding with his hat in his 2 hands, and his little boy tore loose from my grip and ran straight across that yard toward the bride in white, screaming one word over and over. A word that child had no business saying. A word we'd buried beside a river 3 years before. Mama, mama, mama. And the bride turned around. Now, before I tell you what happened next, and I'm going to tell you all of it, the part nobody in that valley ever spoke of again, you need to understand something. This isn't a story about a miracle. Miracles are clean. This was not clean. This is a story about what a man does when the dead come back wearing somebody else's ring. Stay with me, because the hardest part isn't the moment that boy said mama. The hardest part is what his father chose to do about it. I keep a tally book, always have. Little green-backed thing, soft at the corners now, lives in my shirt pocket against my heart whether I like the poetry of that or not. In it I write numbers, head of cattle, bales put up, days since rain, dollars owed and dollars owing. My wife, God rest her, used to say I'd write down my own funeral if somebody handed me the count of mourners. She wasn't wrong. I'm telling you about the book because on the afternoon everything came apart. The book is the only reason I can swear to you the order things happened in. Memory lies. A man's memory, especially when it's protecting him from something. But I'd written it down that same night, sitting in the bunkhouse with my hands still shaking, and I've got the page. It says Pell wedding, boy ran, she turned. Eli dropped his hat. 4 facts, that's all I could manage, some things you can't put a number to. Let me set it down proper. It was the 2nd Saturday of June, and the whole valley had turned out for the Pell wedding the way a valley does when there's nothing else half so interesting for 40 miles. Old August Pell, not old, I suppose, maybe 45. A widower with a good quarter section of bottomland and a temper that had softened with his hairline, had gone off east in the winter and come back in the spring with a bride. Nobody had met her. That alone was enough to fill every supper table from the creek to the ridge with talk. A bride from back east, quiet they said, pretty they said, the ones who'd glimpsed her at the mercantile, kept to herself, spoke soft when she spoke at all. I hadn't laid eyes on her. Neither had Eli. We'd come for the dinner and the dancing, and because August had asked, and because in that country you went when you were asked, full stop. You didn't have to like a man to eat his beef. We'd ridden over from the Brand place, the 3 of us, me, Eli, and the boy. Asa, 5 years old that spring and small for it, with his daddy's stubborn jaw set in a face that was all his mother's. I'll get to that. I have to get to that slow, the way it came to me, because if I tell you too quick you won't feel the floor tilt the way we did. Asa rode in front of Eli on the big bay the way he always did, fists wound into the mane, narrating the entire journey in the relentless way of small boys. Is that a hawk? Is that the Pell place? Why is the windmill not turning? Is there cake? Eli answered every single one. That was a thing about Eli that folks who only knew him from the cattle pens never saw. The patience he kept for that child was bottomless. A still well in a hard man. And he'd lower a bucket into it all day long and never come up dry. He'd had to be both, see, mother and father, 3 years he'd done it. We got to the Pell place around 2 in the afternoon. There were wagons drawn up in the yard and trestle tables under the cottonwoods and somebody's fiddle already complaining its way into tune. Women in their good calico, men with their collars buttoned and miserable about it. The smell of roasting meat and wood smoke and crushed grass, and under it the Green River smell, because the Pell bottomland sat in a long bend of the Sabinal where it ran slow and brown between the willows. I remember Eli stopped the bay at the edge of the yard, just for a breath. I was riding alongside and I saw him do it, and I saw something cross his face when the river smell reached us. He didn't say anything. He never did about the river. But I'd known the man 15 years and I could read him the way you read weather, by the small shift of things. And the river smell put a shadow on him every single time, all those years. And I'd long since learned to ride a little closer and a little quieter when it did. Because of how he'd lost her. I'll say her name. Nell. Nell Brand. That had been Nell Calloway before, no relation to me though folks asked. Eli had married her the summer Asa was on the way, and I'd never in my life seen a man so plainly, foolishly happy as Eli Brand was that year, grinning at fence posts, whistling at the dawn like the dawn had done something special just for him. I'm a poor hand at describing a woman, but she was the kind that made a room turn quiet and then turn warm. Quick to laugh. Quicker to laugh at Eli, which he loved. You could tell he loved being the joke if she was the one telling it. She had a way of touching the back of his neck when she passed behind his chair. Just 2 fingers. I noticed it because my own wife had done a thing like that before, and it about took the wind out of me to see it again in another marriage. She drowned in the spring of Asa's 2nd year. That's the short of it, and the short of it is a lie, because nothing about that day was short. They'd gone to the river crossing below the Brand place, her and the baby and Eli, an ordinary errand on an ordinary day, the water up some from the rains, but nothing a man thinks twice about. The wagon, the current taking the off wheel. I've heard Eli tell it exactly twice in 3 years, and both times he told it flat, like he was reading a brand off a hide, because the only way he could get the words out at all was to strip every feeling off them first. The wagon went. He'd had the baby, he'd had Asa in the crook of his arm and the reins in his other fist in a half-second's choice, the kind of choice no man should be handed, and he'd held onto the boy. He'd held onto the boy, and the river took Nell. They searched 4 days. The water was high and brown and fast for those 4 days, and it gave back nothing. No body. That's the thing folks forget when they hear drowned. Sometimes the river just keeps it. Eli walked that bank morning to night all 4 days, and on the 5th day he stopped walking and he came home, and he never spoke of looking again. There was a marker put up in the little burying ground on the rise behind the Brand house, a stone with her name and no grave under it. Eli had it cut anyway. A man needs a place to put a thing down, even if the thing isn't there. So, that's what was riding behind us into the Pell yard, in the smell of that slow river, the day Asa said Mama. Now I can tell you the rest. We got down off the horses and I took the boy because Eli had to go shake August's hand and do the things a man does. Asa was wild to see the cake, and I had him by the collar of his good little shirt, the one with the bone buttons. Nell had no. I'm getting ahead. The shirt was just a shirt. I had him by the collar, and he was hauling against me like a calf on a rope, going, Cal, I see it. I see the cake. And I was laughing and telling him hold his horses. And over his head, I was watching Eli cross the yard toward where August stood by the porch in his wedding blacks. The fiddle struck up something with a tune to it. Folks turned. And out the front door of the Pell house, on the arm of August's brother, came the bride. I want to be honest about what I saw and didn't see, because everybody afterward had a version where they knew the second she stepped out, and that's the kind of thing people decide they remember. I didn't know. I saw a woman in a pale gray dress, not white, gray, a getting married again gray, a widow's second chance gray, and a little lace veil pinned back off her face, and she was too far and the sun was behind her, and she was just a shape, a pretty shape, the bride, the way a bride is. I thought, well, August did all right for himself. That's the whole of what I thought. God forgive me for how small a thought it was, standing where I was standing on the lip of the rest of all our lives. It was the boy. Asa went still under my hand. I've turned this over more nights than I can count, and I have come to believe that a child knows his mother in a place that has no words and keeps no count of years. He was 2 when she went. He had no memory of her you could speak to, he'd ask, sometimes in the way of small children, did Mama have brown hair like me? And Eli would answer him soft, and the boy would nod and run off, satisfied, the way they are, holding the dead the way they hold everything lightly, until it's needed. He didn't remember her, not in his head, but something in him remembered her anyway. He went still, and then he said, very quiet, just to himself almost, "Mama." I didn't even catch it at first. I felt the word more than heard it, the way you feel a horse decide to bolt a half-second before it does, through the rope, through the ground. I looked down at him, and his whole small face had changed. He wasn't looking at the cake anymore. And then he tore loose. He's small, but he's quick, and I had a grown man's careless grip. The boy wants cake grip, not the boy is about to run into the middle of someone's wedding grip, and he was gone out of it before I'd hardly closed my hand. Just gone. Bolting across that grass between the tables and the turned-around guests, his little boots kicking up, his arms already out, and he was screaming it now, screaming it so the whole yard heard. So the fiddle quit and the talk quit, and the only sound in the whole green afternoon was a 5-year-old boy hollering, "Mama, mama, mama." I went after him, course I did. I had maybe got 2 strides. Because here is the thing I will carry to my own grave under my own stone. The bride turned around. She turned at the sound of that word the way a body turns to a thing it has been straining to hear for 3 years and finally hears. She turned before she could have thought, before sense could have stopped her, turned on pure animal instinct the way a cow turns to a calf's cry across a whole bawling herd, picks the one voice out of the 100. She turned, and the little lace veil swung, and the sun came off her face. And I quit running. I want to describe it to you, and I find I can't. Not really. Not the size of it. I'd known Nell Brand. I'd carried her coffee out to her on cold mornings when she was big with a sa, and Eli was already out at the fences. I'd cut a stone with her name on it and helped wedge it upright in the ground behind the house with my own 2 hands. And I stood in the Pell yard on the 2nd Saturday of June, and I looked at the bride, and the bride was Nell. Older, thinner through the face. There was a long pale scar I'd never seen running up from her jaw toward her ear, the kind of scar a body gets from being pulled half dead out of rough water against the rocks, though I didn't think that then, I just saw it and didn't understand it. Her hair was pinned different, but it was her face. It was her face that I had watched touch the back of Eli Brand's neck with 2 fingers, and it was looking down at a screaming child running across the grass toward her, and it had gone the color of the dead. She didn't say a word. She put one hand up to her own mouth. The bouquet, somebody'd put a fistful of bluebonnets and Indian paintbrush in her hands, valley flowers. The only kind there were. The bouquet dropped straight out of her fingers and the flowers went all over the grass. Asa hit her at a dead run and wrapped both arms around her legs and buried his face in the gray skirts and just held on, the way he held onto the mane on the bay, fists wound in, like the whole world might try to take her and he wasn't going to allow it. And I watched her, she didn't bend to him. Not at first. She stood rigid as a fence post with her hand over her mouth and her eyes gone huge and wet, looking down at the top of that small brown head buried against her, and you could see the war in her plain as day. You could see her wanting to drop down into that grass and take him up, and you could see something else, something with iron in it, holding her up straight and not letting her, and I didn't understand it then. I understood it later. I'll get to that too. I heard August Pell say, sort of stupid, sort of laughing, not understanding, "Now whose boy is?" And then he stopped, because his bride was crying without a sound and her shoulders had started to shake, and a thing was happening at his wedding that he could not name but could feel, the way you feel weather change. I turned around to find Eli. He was maybe 30 feet from me, where he'd been crossing to August, and he'd stopped just like I'd stopped, and he was looking at the bride. Folks, I have seen that man take the news of his wife's death. I was standing beside him when they came up from the 4th days searching with their hats off and nothing in their hands, and I saw what that did to his face. It was nothing to this. The day Nell drowned, Eli Brand's face had simply closed like a door, and stayed closed for 3 years, and we'd all learned to talk to him through the door. The door blew off the hinges. His hat was in his 2 hands, and his 2 hands had stopped working. I watched the hat fall. I watched it land brim up in the grass by his boots, and he didn't look at it. He had gone white to the lips, and his mouth had come open a little, and he wasn't breathing. I swear to you, he wasn't breathing. And then he took one breath, one huge sucking breath, like a man coming up out of deep water himself, and the sound of it I told you about already. Not a shout, smaller than a shout. The sound of a breath a man's been holding 3 years without knowing he held it. He said one word. I was close enough to hear it, and nobody else was. He said, "Nell." Not loud, not a question. He said it the way you'd say a prayer you'd given up praying. She heard it. Across all that yard, with the boy still wrapped around her legs and her hand still at her mouth, and August Pell standing dumbstruck at her side in his wedding blacks. She heard her own true name in her dead husband's voice, and her eyes came up off the boy and found Eli, and the two of them looked at each other across the wreck of that afternoon, across 3 years and a river and another man's wedding, and a stone with her name carved into it, and not one soul in that whole valley made a sound. I will tell you what I saw in her face when she looked at him, because it is the thing that changed the story from a miracle into what it really was. It wasn't only joy. There was joy in it, God. There was. It cracked her open. You could see the love in it leap up like a thing too long banked. But there was something else underneath the joy, and the something else was fear, raw and animal, and there was shame in it, deep shame, and there was, and this is the part I couldn't make sense of for a long while, there was something almost like no. Like a hand held up. Like, please don't, you don't understand, please. She looked at him like a woman who had a reason. And then August Pell finally found the bottom of what was happening, and he said, in a voice gone strange, "Nell, honey, who is this? Whose child is this?" And Nell Brand, who had been 3 years drowned, took her hand down from her mouth. She looked at the man she was an hour from marrying. She looked at the husband she'd left for dead. She looked, last and longest, down at the child wound around her legs, the child she had not yet touched, holding herself back from him with everything iron she had left. And she opened her mouth to answer. 2 words. The whole valley heard them. And then, because 2 words like that hang in the air begging to be taken back, and because she would not take them back, she got down. She got down into the grass at last, folded right down in her gray dress with the dropped bluebonnets crushing under her knees, and she took a Saz face in both her hands and turned it up to look at, and whatever she'd been holding back with all that iron, it broke. It broke clean. She made a sound I'd never heard a person make, low and torn and from somewhere underneath the ribs, and she pulled him in and put her face down in his hair and rocked him, the both of them down in the flowers, and the boy was saying "Mama, Mama, Mama" into her neck like he was paying out 3 years of it in one breath. I have written some hard things in my tally book over the years, numbers of the dead in the bad winter, the day my own wife went. I never wrote down the sound Nell Brand made getting down into that grass, because there is no number for it and there are no letters for it either, and a man knows when a thing is past his power to set down. I just stood there with my empty hand still half curled where the boy's collar had been, and I let it go by me. And I have carried it ever since, exactly the way you carry a thing you couldn't write down, whole and heavy and unfaded. August Pell made a noise. I'd near forgot him, which tells you something about that afternoon, that a man could forget the groom at his own wedding. But he was standing there in his blacks not 3 feet from his bride, where she knelt in the grass with another man's child, his child. The child plainly was, and August's face was doing a thing that was worse, in its way, than Eli's had done. Eli's face had blown open into grief and joy all at once. August's was just slowly understanding that he had been standing on something that was not the ground. "Nell," he said. He used the name she'd given him, and I understood in that one word that it was the name she'd given him, that he'd had no other, that he had courted and proposed to and very nearly married a woman whose whole self was a stone he didn't know was hollow. "Nell, who he looked at the boy. He looked at the boy's face, which was her face, and he looked across the yard to where Eli Brand stood white as his shirt with his hat in the grass, and I watched August Pell do the arithmetic. I watched him add it up. He was not a stupid man. That was the cruelty of it. A stupid man might have held onto the not knowing a while longer. August got there in about 4 seconds, and you could see each one of them cross his face like cloud shadow over a field, and at the end of the 4 seconds he was a different man than he'd been at the start. Older. Hollowed his own way. He didn't yell. I'll say that for August Pell forever. There was a yelling kind of man in him, we all knew it, the temper that had gentled but not gone, and he reached down into himself for it. You could see him reach, the way you reach for a tool you've always had on your belt. And it wasn't there. Whatever was happening in that grass had taken even his anger off him. He just stood, with his big rough hands open at his sides and nothing to do with them, in front of all his neighbors, at the wedding he'd waited a widower's lonely years for, and watched it come apart at his feet. The guests had gone the particular silent of people who know they are seeing something they were never meant to see. Then, the way a herd starts to move, one or two and then all at once, they began to find reasons to not be looking. Mothers turned children. Men found the sudden need to study the cottonwoods. Old Mrs. Pell, August's mother, near 80 and sharp as a fence staple, was the only one who kept watching dead on, and I have always thought she understood the whole shape of it before any of the rest of us, because she'd buried a husband and 2 children of her own, and she knew that look on a woman, the look of one who has been somewhere past the edge of living and come back not all the way. It was the preacher of all people who did the decent thing. Brother Coyne, a soft round man who I'd never credited with much spine, stepped down off the porch and said, gentle but firm, friends, I think this family has some things to say to one another. Let's give them the room. And he started moving folks back toward the tables, toward the food, toward anywhere but here, and the fiddle player, bless him, he didn't know what else to do, struck up something low. And slowly the yard turned itself back into a wedding that wasn't a wedding anymore, and a little island of stillness was left in the middle of it where a woman knelt in crushed bluebonnets holding a boy, and 2 men stood looking at her, and at each other. I'm going to leave the yard now and tell you the rest the way it came to me, over that evening and the days after in pieces, because that's how the truth of it came out in pieces, the way she could stand to give it, and the way Eli could stand to hear it. I wasn't in the room for all of it. Some of what I'll tell you, Eli told me later, the once, sitting in the dark of the bunkhouse the way he'd told me about the river 3 years before, flat, with all the feeling stripped off so the words would come. And some of it I put together myself, because that's a thing I'm good for, putting the count together, even when I'd rather not know the sum. Here is what happened to Nell Brand in the river. The current took her, the way Eli had always said, but the river didn't keep her. It carried her down and down, miles down, past the Pell bottomland and past 3 other men's bottomlands, turning her over in the brown water, breaking her up against the rocks. That was the scar. The long pail one up her jaw, and there were others on her hip, her shoulder. The leg that never after sat quite right in the socket and gave her that small hitch in her walk that I'd taken, that first far-off glimpse, for nothing more than a bride's nervous step. The river carried her the better part of a day and a night, and finally pushed her up onto a gravel bar far downstream, in a stretch of country where the Brands were not known, where the search never reached because the search was looking in the wrong 4 miles for the wrong 4 days. A Mexican family, sheep people, working a lease down there found her at dawn, more dead than not, and did the thing that decent people do, which is they took the broken stranger in and they did not let her die. It was a long time before she could tell them a name. The head wound, see. She wasn't out of her senses the way the cheap stories have it, where a body forgets clean and walks around blank as a new slate. It was worse than that and stranger. She remembered in pieces, and the pieces came in the wrong order, and for the longest while she couldn't lay them end to end and see they made a life. She'd know the smell of a thing, coffee on a cold morning, and weep and not know why. She'd say a word in her fever, Once, the sheepwoman told her later she'd said the wheel over and over and not know, waking, what wheel. She knew there was a child. That came early and stayed. A child, and it near drove her mad because she couldn't reach it, couldn't put a face to it, knew only the size and the weight of a thing she was supposed to be holding and wasn't. Months. It took months. The leg kept her down through the summer and into the fall, and the pieces kept coming, and somewhere in there. She couldn't ever say exactly when, and I believe her. I believe a thing like that doesn't happen at an hour you can mark. Somewhere in there the pieces came together and made a name and a place and a man and a baby. And Nell Brand woke all the way up into the full and terrible knowledge of who she was, and what she had lost, and how long she had been gone. And by then it was already too late. That's the first turn of the knife, and I want you to feel it, because everybody who hears this story wants to know, why didn't she just come home? And they ask it like it's simple, like the road runs both ways and the only thing wanting was the will. It does not run both ways. It never does. Let me show you. By the time she knew herself, it was near 6 months since the river. She was 3 days hard travel from home with a leg that couldn't sit a horse and no money and no proof on this earth that she was who she said she was, a dead woman, with a stone already cut. And here is the thing she carried, the thing she finally gave Eli in the dark of that first night, the thing that I think near killed them both to say and to hear. She knew how Eli had saved the boy. She'd been in the water, going under, coming up, and in one of the times she came up she'd seen it, seen Eli with the baby in the crook of his arm and his hand out toward her, reaching, and the half-second where he couldn't have both, where the river was going to take one of them and he had to choose which, and she had watched him choose. She'd watched him keep the child, which was right, which was the only thing on God's earth he could have done, and she knew it. She knew it with the whole of her mind, but she had been the thing he let go of. She had felt the water close over her knowing he'd chosen, and a wound like that does not heal the way the leg healed. It went in too deep, and in the long fevered dark of those downstream months it had grown into something she was ashamed of and could not stop. A small, black, unforgivable knot if he let me go. Not blame. Worse than blame. The knowledge that she had been, in the one moment that counted most, the one he could live without. She knew it wasn't fair. She told Eli that first night. I knew it wasn't fair. I knew there was no other thing you could do. I have known it every day. And she'd carried the shame of feeling it anyway like a stone sewn into her own skin. And it was that, as much as the leg or the distance or the money, that kept her on the gravel bar and then kept her drifting and then kept her, eventually, going east instead of west. How do you walk back into a man's house when you've spent half a year unable to forgive him for the one right thing he did? How do you take up a child again when some ruined animal part of you flinches from the father? She told herself the boy was young. She told herself 2 years old forgets. She told herself a clean grief heals where a torn open one festers, that she'd be doing them a kindness, staying dead, letting them keep the simple sad story instead of this monstrous complicated one where the mother comes back wrong, scarred and limping, and full of a poison she can't name. She told herself 100 kind-sounding things, and every single month that she told them to herself, the door home swung a little further shut, until the not going back stopped being a choice she was making and became just the shape of her life. The way water that's gone one way around a rock has gone that way, and you'd have to break the whole river to send it back. That's how a person stays dead, friends. Not all at once, by degrees. By the daily small mercy of not today, not yet, it's too late already, what good now? I have done versions of it myself, smaller, with smaller things, letters I never sent, a brother I never wrote, the years stacking up until the silence got too tall to climb back over. We've all got our own dead we're staying, in our own smaller ways. Hers was just the biggest one I ever stood next to. She went east because east was where she'd come from before Eli, a girl with no people left and nothing holding her. She took the name she took. She did sewing, and then she did better than sewing, and she got steady and quiet and gray, a widow folks assumed, and she let them assume it because it was true enough. She was a widow of a kind, the strangest kind, a woman widowed from her own self. And in the second year of that, August Pell came east on business and met a quiet gray-eyed seamstress with a hitch in her walk and a stillness in her that he mistook for peace. And he was lonely and kind and persistent, and she was so tired, friends. She was so tired of being no one. He offered her a name and a place and a bottomland in a valley, and she did not let herself think too hard about which valley, about how a river might run through more than one man's land, about how the country is smaller than grief makes you believe. She let him bring her west. I think, and this is mine, this part, she never said it, I think some buried piece of her knew. I think the piece of her that was still Nell, still Assa's mother, steered her back toward this country the way the river itself runs downhill, blind and sure, toward the only low place it knows. I think she came home without letting herself know she was coming home, and the river that had carried her away delivered her back to the same bend of the same water, and put her in a gray dress in a yard, a half-mile from her own son on the one afternoon out of all the afternoons that he'd be there to run across the grass and call her by the name no living soul had called her in 3 years. You can believe that's chance if you want. I keep a tally book. I'm a man of counts and odds, and I don't believe that was chance. That first night they put her in the old Pell house, and August went and stayed at his brother's, and you can imagine the talk, the whole valley up till dawn with the talk. Eli took Asa home. The boy didn't want to go, screamed himself raw at being parted from her even for the night, and it took everything Eli had to carry him off, the boy reaching back over his shoulder the whole way down the road. I rode alongside. Neither of us said one word the whole ride. There wasn't one to say. But Eli went back the next morning, and the next, and on the third evening he came and got me, said Cal, ride over with me, and I knew it was the night he was going to hear all of it, and I think he wanted a body within calling distance who knew the old shape of things, in case the new shape was past his bearing. I sat on the Pell porch in the dark while the two of them talked inside low for hours, and I heard the rise and fall of it but not the words, and twice I heard her break, and once I heard him, Eli Brand, who I'd seen take his wife's death dry-eyed because the crying was too big to let out. Once I heard him make a sound through that wall that I got up and walked out to the horses so as not to hear, because a man's owed the privacy of that, and I gave it to him the only way I could. When he came out it was near midnight. He stood on the porch a while. The river was loud that night, up some from rain in the hills, and we could both hear it down past the willows, that same slow brown water, going about its old indifferent business in the dark. She thought she was sparing us, he said finally, not to me exactly, to the dark, to the river. All that time, she thought the kindest thing was to stay gone. I didn't say anything. You don't to a thing like that. I'd have taken her back any way the river gave her back, he said. Scarred, bent, hating me for living, I'd have taken that, I'd take it now. His voice did something. 3 years, Cal. There's a stone up on the rise with her name on it, and I put it there with my own hands, and every day of 3 years I've gone half a mile out of my way so I wouldn't have to pass it, and she was alive. She was alive and sewing dresses in some other man's town, deciding I was better off. He stopped. He pressed the heel of his hand hard against his mouth, the way you'd stop a wound. How do you forgive a person, he said when he could, for loving you so wrong? And there it was, the real question, the heavy one. Not will he take her back, I think he'd have walked through fire to take her back. That was never in doubt to me. The question that stood up on that porch in the dark and looked the both of us in the eye was harder, and it had no clean answer, and it was this. She'd had a reason, a human, broken, almost understandable reason. She'd weighed his grief and the boys and her own ruin, and she'd made a choice, stay dead. It's kinder, and she'd been wrong, dead wrong. Every day of it the boy had cried for a mother who was 3 days east mending other people's clothes. How does a man hold both of those? That she suffered, and that she chose the suffering, his and the boys, without ever asking him whether he'd rather have her broken than not have her at all. And there was August. We hadn't even got to August yet, what was owed there, what the valley would say, the wedding undone, a good lonely man hollowed out in front of his neighbors with no fault of his own. That was a debt too, and it wasn't going to forgive itself either. Eli picked his hat up off the porch rail, settled it. "A sow wants her," he said. "That part's simple. Whatever else this is, that part's the only simple thing in it, and I'll not be the man who keeps a boy from his mother twice." He looked out toward the dark willows, toward the sound of the water. "But she has to choose us this time, out loud, in the daylight, knowing all of it." He was quiet a moment. "And I have to find out if I can stand next to her without that river running between us every minute for the rest of my life." He came down off the porch, and we got the horses. I want to tell you it was settled that night. It wasn't. The hardest of it was still ahead, the choosing, the daylight, August's piece of it, and a thing none of us yet knew was coming, a thing about the boy that would put the whole question to all three of them in a way that talking on a porch never could. But that's the next part. I was there for it, which is the only reason I can give it to you straight instead of pieced together. I'd ridden over in the morning to help Eli with a stretch of fence the spring melt had knocked flat, ordinary work, the kind of work that's a mercy when everything else has come unmoored. Nell was at the house. The boy was supposed to be at the house with her. And August Pell, as it happened, had ridden over early, a day early, not to do the choosing, he said, hat in his hands, but because he'd remembered Eli had borrowed his big timberjack the winter before and he wanted it back, which was the thinnest excuse a grown man ever rode 5 miles to make, and we all knew it. He'd come to look at her one more time before Sunday made it final, to stand in the same yard. I don't blame him a particle. I'd have done the same. So we were all of us in that one place when it happened. Me and Eli at the fence line a 1/4 mile off. Nell and August by the house, talking low and careful, the strangest pair of people in the whole state of Texas, the woman and the man she'd almost married, working out how to say goodbye with grace. And the boy. The boy slipped off. Nobody saw him go. That's the thing about a child with a fixed idea. They get quiet, and quiet reads as good, and good reads as safe, and you turn your back for the length of a hard conversation, and the quiet good child is gone. He'd heard the word Sunday somewhere, I think. Heard the grown people saying Sunday on Sunday, "We'll settle it Sunday," and a child doesn't know what settling is. A child only knows that the grown-ups have a plan, and that plans are the things that take people away. I think he decided he wasn't going to wait to find out which way Sunday would settle him. I think he decided to settle it himself, the only way he knew, with the river and the rope. It was Nell who knew first, before any of us. She stopped mid-word. August told me this after, stopped talking and went still and white the way she had in the wedding yard, and she said, "Where's a sa?" Not a question even, and then she was moving, and then she was running, hitching leg and all, down through the willows toward the water, screaming his name in a voice that carried all the way to the fence line and put the both of us, me and Eli, over the wire and running before we even knew what we were running for. He'd gone to the crossing. Of course he had. The crossing below the Brand place, the same shallow ford where the wagon went 3 years before, where the marker on the rise pointed down to like an accusing finger. That was where the river had taken her. In his understanding, that was the river's mouth, the place it ate people, and a boy who means to tie himself to his mother, so the river can't take her has first got to go and have it out with the river. He'd gone down to the water with his plow line. To do what exactly I don't think even he knew, to tell it, to dare it, to tie himself to a willow root so it would know he wasn't afraid of it. Child logic going somewhere no grown logic could follow. And the river was up. I told you it had been raining in the hills. The crossing that was ankle-deep most of June was running fast and cold and brown over the rocks, 3 feet and shoving, and a boy of 5 at the edge of fast water is a boy already half taken. I came through the willows behind Nell, and I will see what I saw there till the day they cut my own stone. The boy was out past the bank already. He'd waded in, the idiot brave baby. He'd waded in up to his chest to be closer to the thing he'd come to fight, and the current had his legs, and he was holding to a snag of driftwood with both arms and the plow line trailing useless off his wrist, and his face turned back toward the bank, and he was not screaming. That's what undid me. He wasn't screaming. He'd gone past screaming into the cold animal quiet of a creature that knows it's caught. He just looked back at us with his mother's eyes, holding on, the way he'd held on to her legs in the wedding yard, the way he held on to everything, and the river worked at him, patient, the way it works at a fence post, the way it had worked at her 3 years before. Nell didn't stop at the bank. I want you to understand what that water was to her. That water had broken her body in a dozen places. That water had taken half a year of her mind and scattered it downstream. That water was the thing she'd flinched from in her dreams for 3 years, the thing that had drowned not just her body but her whole self and left this gray, careful stranger in its place. Of all the people in the world who had a right to freeze at the edge of that river, to stand on the bank and scream and reach and not be able to make her legs carry her in, it was Nell Brand. The river had earned her terror fair and square. She went in like the bank wasn't there, hitching leg and gray skirts and all, straight off the edge into the fast brown water that had killed her, no breath of hesitation, and I understood. I understood it right then, standing useless in the willows. I understood the thing she'd told Eli in the dark, the poison, he let me go, and I understood that this was her answer to it. 3 years she'd carried the unforgivable knowledge that in the one moment that counted she had been the thing that could be let go of. And here was the moment come round again, the same river, the same crossing, a child in the water in a half second's everything. And she was not going to be the one who let go. Not this time. Not if it killed her twice. She was going to prove to the river and to Eli and to her own ruined, flinching heart that whatever she was, whatever the water had made her, she was not the kind that let go. The current took her too, near enough. It spun her, she went under, came up, that scarred bad leg useless against the shove of it. But she got an angle on the snag where the boy was, and the water carried her into it instead of past it. And she got one arm around him. One arm. And then the river had the both of them, and the driftwood was the only thing between them and the long brown miles downstream that she knew the taste of better than any living soul. Eli hit the water a half second behind her. And here is the part I have turned over most of all, the part that is the whole story to me, the tally that won't balance no matter how I work it. Because Eli Brand, 3 years before, had stood in moving water with the boy in one arm and his wife going under, and a half second's choice no man should be handed, and he had chosen the child and let the woman go, and it had been right, and it had broken everything. And now here it was again. The same impossible water, the same 2 people in it. The same man. Except it wasn't the same, because August Pell was there. August had come through the willows behind us all, slower, an older, heavier man, and he took in the water and the boy and Nell going in after, and he did not hesitate either. There were 2 men where 3 years ago there'd been one, and that made all the difference between a choice and no choice, between losing one to save one and the wild, bare chance of saving both. Eli went for the boy. He didn't have to choose this time. He could go for the boy because there was another man to go for the woman, and August Pell, who had every reason on God's earth to let the river have the woman who'd lied to him and the child that wasn't his. August Pell went for Nell. He was the bigger man. That mattered in that water. He got to her where she clung to the snag with one arm full of boy and the river full of the rest of her. And he got his big freight hauler's arms around her and the boy both. And he set his boots against a sunk rock and he held, just held, a human dam in the brown shove of it, while Eli came up on the downstream side and took the boy off her and got him up out of the worst of it. And the 2 men between them walked Nell and the child back against the current to the bank, one staggering step at a time. And I and another fellow who'd come running got out into the shallows to take them as they came, and we hauled the whole knot of them up onto the grass. The boy coughing river water, Nell on her hands and knees retching and sobbing and reaching for the boy, Eli with the boy, August on his back in the mud with his chest heaving and his wedding-going clothes ruined, and his face turned up to the sky. Nobody drowned. I want to say that plain because the river had taught us all to expect the other thing. Nobody drowned. The river gave them back, all of them. It had taken Nell 3 years before, and it gave her back now along with the boy and the two men, gave back every single one, and a man who keeps a tally book his whole life wants to call that the ledger balancing, the river paying back what it took. It isn't, though. That's the thing I have to be honest about. The river didn't give Nell back her 3 years, or the boy his mother through all the nights he'd cried for her, or August the wife he thought he had. A river doesn't balance a ledger. It just takes when it takes and gives when it gives, and there's no justice in either, only weather and chance and the work of human arms against the current. The arms are the only part that means anything. The river's got no morals. We're the ones who have to. The choosing happened that afternoon after all, a day early, soaked and shaking on the riverbank instead of Sunday clean in the yard. But it didn't happen with words. It had already happened in the water, where all the truest things get decided, with the body before the mouth can catch up. Nell had her boy. She sat in the mud in her ruined gray dress and would not let go of him, and he would not let go of her. The plow line still knotted round his wrist, and the question of whose he was and where she belonged had been answered by her going off that bank without a breath of pause. She'd chosen. Out loud in the daylight, knowing all of it. Only she'd said it with her whole body in the one language the river understands, and there was no taking it back and no doubting it. Eli stood over the two of them. He didn't kneel down into it. Not yet. There was a thing he had to do first, and it was the hardest and the finest thing I ever watched a man do, and it was August's. He went to August. August was sitting up by then, on the bank alone. The way the man who's lost is always somehow alone even in a crowd. And Eli Brand walked over to him dripping and put out his hand and helped August Pell to his feet, and the two of them stood there a moment, the husband and the almost husband, the man who'd let her go in the river once and the man who'd just pulled her out of it. And Eli said, "I was close. I heard it," Eli said. "I've got no way to pay that." And August looked over at Nell in the mud with the boy, and something moved across his hollowed face, and he said, "You don't pay it, you just don't waste it." He picked up his ruined hat. "I courted a woman who wasn't there," he said. "I see that now. She was never in that gray dress. She was here the whole time in this water, waiting on the two of you to be brave enough." He set the hat on his wet head. "Don't make me have pulled her out for nothing, Brand. That's all. That's the whole of what I'll ask." And he walked up through the willows to his horse, August Pell, with his back straight, having lost the thing he'd waited years of his lonely life for, and having saved it for another man with his own arms and asked nothing in return but that it not be wasted. I have known a great many men. I have not known a finer one than August Pell was on that riverbank, and I have never been able to make the tally come out fair for him, and I've quit trying. Some accounts don't close. You just carry them. Eli knelt down then. Down into the mud, with the woman who'd been 3 years drowned and the boy who'd tied himself to her with a plow line so the river couldn't take her again. And the question he'd asked me on the porch in the dark, "How do you forgive a person for loving you so wrong?" I never heard him answer it. Not in words, not ever. I don't think it's a question that gets answered. I think it's a question you decide to stop asking, which is a different thing and a harder one, and the only kind of forgiveness I've ever seen actually hold. He put his arms around the both of them. Nell flinched, I saw it. The old animal flinched, the poison still in her. He let me go, she flinched even as he came toward her, and I watched her see herself do it, and I watched her decide. I watched her choose, the second hard choice in one afternoon, to let him hold her anyway, to lean her scarred face into his neck and let the flinch be just a flinch and not a wall. The 2 fingers. She put her 2 fingers on the back of his neck, in the mud, soaking wet, with the boy crushed warm between them. And I had to look away then, the way I'd looked away on the porch, because some counts a man's got no business keeping. The boy fell asleep before they ever got him up to the house. Just went out all at once, the way they do when the terror finally lets them go slack and heavy in his mother's arms, the plow line still round his wrist. Nobody untied it. I think they let him keep it. I think there are some things a child has to put down himself in his own time, and you can't cut the rope for him. You can only be there alive. The count's still right. On the morning he finally wakes up and decides he doesn't need it. There's a stone up on the rise behind the Brand house with Nell's name cut into it. They never took it down. I asked Eli about it once, years on, why he'd leave a gravestone standing over a living woman, and he was quiet a while, and then he said the strangest true thing. He said, "Somebody did die in that river, Cal. The woman who'd have stayed gone to spare us, she's the one under that stone. We let her lie." I wrote that down in my tally book the same night. It's near the only thing in all those green pages that isn't a number. Last spring the boy turned 11. He doesn't carry the rope anymore. Hasn't for years. But I noticed this last high water season, when the crossing came up brown and fast, I noticed he still goes down to the bank when the river's running hard and stands there a while and looks at it.